Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News, a remarkable update in the Max Verstappen Red Bull saga, with news coming out a couple of weeks ago about a potential contract clause in Max's deal that allows him to walk away from Red Bull before his contract comes to an end if Helmut Marko is fired or decides to walk away. Now we have new information saying that this contract clause was not known about by Horner or even by Red Bull up until very recently indeed. A supposed remarkable power play behind the scenes by Helmut Marko to put this contract clause into effect, which gives Verstappen and Marko much power over Christian Horner in this clear power struggle behind the scenes at the team. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. It is, of course, race week down under in Australia. I think Daniel Ricciardo needs a big weekend. Of course, it's his home Grand Prix. These are his previous results at the Australian Grand Prix. He, of course, did not race last year in 2023 because he wasn't on the grid. He hasn't had the greatest time here historically, never scored a podium, and he has had to respond to quite some media attention over the last few days as a result of this whole situation. RB, not Red Bull, RB, they say that Tsunoda needs to take the next step in his new season. It's tough to say what more Yuki can really do. He can keep beating his teammates, and if Ricciardo was to beat him comfortably, that would seemingly qualify Ricciardo for the Red Bull seat. But Tsunoda can beat Ricciardo all he likes, and he's probably not going to get that seat. It just is what it is. That's just how Red Bull seem to see him, and I think also to some extent, Tsunoda has even admitted that Ricciardo, when he joined the team, was better at, helping with feedback, developing the car, is naturally a more mature driver really than Yuki is, so maybe it's understandable. But even Ricciardo himself made some interesting statements that have, well, there's been some backlash to this. Ricciardo said that when he joined the team, he felt that he effectively helped them by being experienced. They were struggling at the time. He said the following: "I've been in F1 a long time, driven lots of cars, seen a lot of things. The team was struggling a bit at the time. I could see that my experience was helping. The way the team responded to what I had to say, the questions they asked. You realise with age that you have power to change how a garage feels, how a team responds. There's hundreds of people that work with these teams, but you're one of the two people who the world watches to see how the team performs. We don't just drive the car, we have the ability to alter the atmosphere in the room. That's something that I'm aware of." So I don't think Ricciardo's wrong on this, and even Tsunoda admitted that, yeah, when Ricciardo came in, he did a very good job giving feedback to the team and all these other factors. So maybe that's what the team would like to see a bit more so from Yuki. But also there were some comments that Ricciardo had to respond to from Alan Jones, 1980 F1 World Champion, on the future of Daniel, saying, look, bad luck or otherwise, I'm sure Daniel would have liked to have had better results than what he has done. We can't be blaming the car all the time, which has been a tendency of the past. I'd love to see him go well in Melbourne, but it's just not happening right now. But I think that either his luck is going to have to change or he's going to have to lift his game if he's got any chance of getting back into the Red Bull team. He is treading water. He really needs to have some very good results and put up a good show. He can't be dwelling down where he is. I hate to say it, but I think we have seen the best days from him. He has had his bum in a few decent cars, irrespective of what people say. I'd love him to become super competitive and be up there challenging in the points, but I just think we're going to need to see a couple of things before we see that again. Basically saying Daniel Ricciardo's past it. He's not the driver they used to be. Do I disagree personally? No, I think he's probably on the money, but of course Ricciardo had to comment on this, and he was actually asked here by Australian media, like, hey, what do you think about those statements? And basically was asked, do you have something to prove? Anything, point to prove after those comments? And Daniel basically says, no, nothing to prove at all, and then he just walks off. So, the comments maybe got to him to some degree, but at the same time, I think he does have something to prove, to be fair. There's been lots of spotlight on Ricciardo going into this season. His year has not started off the way that he'd have wanted it to. It is home Grand Prix. There's going to be Piastri-related comparisons because those are the two Aussie drivers on the grid as it stands. So I think that he's got to have a good race, really, or at least a good next few races, because if he doesn't, I just don't see how he remains in Formula 1 long term, and on the current trajectory, I don't really see that happening, especially with Sergio Perez doing what is required of him at Red Bull, despite not having scored a fastest lap. Perez in quite some time. These are the fastest laps of the last 20 Grand Prix. Of course, it was Leclerc last weekend, couple of Verstappens, Hamilton's on it, even Yuki's on it a few races ago, which is kind of cool stuff, and Fernando Alonso, etc., etc. This looks like a more interesting championship than what the actual race results are, probably expectedly so. But Verstappen is appearing plenty of times on the fastest lap calendar, and for understandable reasons. Will he, however, be continuing to drive the Red Bull for too much longer? That has been a big question over the last few weeks, as all of these Horner, Marko related questions hang over the team. And there's even more updates on this today that we, of course, will be diving into. First of all, Jos Verstappen. So the camp is effectively Christian Horner is the node at the centre of everything. He has strained relationships with basically everybody in the team. My feeling is that Yovidya, the owner of Red Bull, wants to adopt a different business model when it comes to how Red Bull is structured. taking, potentially, Red Bull as a technology group outside of the main Red Bull brand so they can be a bit more distant and run it slightly more from afar. The feeling is that Horner is the man that Nvidia wants to lead that process up. That's probably why they haven't got rid of him, which would be very easy to do, given all of the drama around him over the recent weeks. Jos Verstappen, of course, wants his son to be in the best car. Like, okay, you can say many things about Jos, but I don't think he's stupid, right? Like, I don't think he would say the things that he said if he didn't feel like it was best for Max, for his son. And he has said that if Horner stays, the team will implode. I think he actually said explode, and it ain't going to go well. So you can obviously theorize, why would Jos think that Horner gone is best for Max? But also, I'm sure that Jos thinks, well, the Red Bull is the best car, so ideally, they want Horner to go so Max can stay at Red Bull. For whatever reason, he feels that it's basically Horner is untenable, that situation at Red Bull. Obviously, there's speculation to be done on that. But Jos even goes further to this today. He doesn't really comment further on his comments of a couple of weeks ago where he said that, yeah, the team is going to explode. But he did say this: it is definitely hard for the outside world to follow. I think it's a necessity for them, Red Bull, to get calm within the team. But given the circumstances, I think it will continue for a while. The feeling is that, yeah, heads are going to roll at some point. It's still a question as to who wins this power struggle, and there's more stuff to do with Horner because the woman accuser is making a complaint to the FIA, hiring a new lawyer to appeal the result of the investigation, so it's not over yet. I'm curious, it doesn't help the whole process, and he even confirms there is definitely a certain power struggle going on. So if there was any doubt about this, Jos has said it now publicly. We will see. I can't say too much about it, although sometimes he does, and he probably will continue to. I hope peace returns sooner. They start concentrating on racing, because that's what it's all about, but this is not good. So I hope peace returns soon. I don't think he's especially feels that it will, and very much arguably, actually not even arguably, it's an absolute matter of fact, Jos has fanned the flames of this whole discussion over the last couple of weeks. So therefore, of course, it's raised into question, could Verstappen leave? Christian Horner has even said that if he wants to leave, they're not going to hold him to the contract, but they could, theoretically, unless there is something in place where Verstappen can exit his deal. He, of course, signed an extension, was it in 2022, I'm pretty sure, to bring him up to 2028, a very long-term deal, which is still quite a long way from its conclusion. That takes him through this era, through the first several years of the next ground effect era, 2026 and beyond. And then we'll see what happens after that. There's been a general feeling that Verstappen might think, you know what, after 2028, I'm just going to call it a day in the sport, go do something else for a few years. And I feel like it's quite likely he will do that if the number of races keeps going up and all these other factors. But will he be driving for Red Bull when they get to that point? That has been the big question over the last couple of weeks. There are seats available elsewhere. Mercedes, Aston Martin are the two most, I would say, likely candidates. Ferrari, they're going to be set in stone. They're getting Hamilton in. Leclerc's not going anywhere. That's a done deal. So if Max wants to leave, it's either Mercedes or it's probably Aston. There's no other real options. If Mercedes are actually looking quite competitive, I feel like this deal isn't necessarily going to be done already, but might be closer than it is. But if I'm Max, I'm looking at Merc and I'm thinking, these guys are lost right now. Can I be confident they're going to make a good car even in 2026? Not necessarily, although there has been a feeling that Mercedes are right up there with Ferrari ahead of the pack in terms of the 2026 engine development, which might be more towards what Verstappen is looking at. We did discuss the other day that Aston Martin is not a complete impossibility, given Lawrence Stroll's history with getting Vettel, getting Alonso, obviously building, their own massive factory, the Honda Works partnership, a team that Verstappen from an engine side has lots of experience with, and they produce the best engine at the moment. So there is something to be said on that. But still the point would be, can Verstappen really leave? Would he really leave? And actually, is that something that we should predict or even expect to happen? But today there's been speculation and sources telling Autosport that the contract clause in place that supposedly existed, that was talked about a couple of weeks ago, does indeed exist, and actually was made without the knowledge of Christian Horner. Now this seems, I wouldn't say difficult to believe, because sometimes even in contract negotiations and stuff that you'd have thought would be scrutinized as much as this, potentially these things could still happen. It seems remarkable that this might have happened, but it seems plausible, I think, nonetheless. So this was talked about now the 4th of March, when Helmut Marko said, if Max wants to go, I won't stand in his way, implying that they are effectively in partnership and an exit clause exists in Verstappen's deal, which if Helmut leaves, or if Helmut is fired, then Max is allowed to go. This would also explain exactly why Max has been so supportive of Marko over the last couple of years, really. Whenever he's been asked about Marko potentially leaving, he said, yeah, if Marko goes, I'm going to go. And people are like, are you sure you can do that? You know, you've signed a deal until 2028. Turns out this is the reason why. But the full story behind this, if what we're about to discuss here in a second is true, is very remarkable in terms of the power dynamics behind the scenes at Red Bull. So this is the Autosport article. And as Verstappen has said, I think it's very clear that he has to stay to Marko. Everyone has his own role, which is the way that it's always been. And of course, after Dietrich's death, some of those tasks were split up. I've always indicated that Helmut has to stay for the future as long as he's alive, which is quite the thing to say, isn't it? Obviously, we know that Marko's getting on a bit, and you might think, damn, the guy could have retired by now. But no, Max wants him to stay. Marko was instrumental in getting Verstappen his Formula 1 drive in the first place. They are, you know, they're going to be partners until Marko passes away. That's how it seems. That's what Max says. I've always been very clear about it, like last year after Qatar, and I hope that that doesn't change, because if it does, things are going to change at Red Bull. But therefore the question is, okay, sure, you want to leave if Marko leaves. What if Red Bull say no? You're the best driver on the grid. You won all the championships. Red Bull can just say, you signed the deal. You're going to be here until 2028. Turns out there's more to it than that. Exit clauses in these contracts, of course, do tend to exist, often on performance grounds. So if a driver is underperforming, they can drop him. Of course, not going to be the case with Verstappen. Or there can be exit clauses which just have total freedom, right? We saw this is what happened with Hamilton when Mercedes offered him the 1+1 deal for 2024-2025 that he signed late August or something, 2023, that Hamilton signed then. There was an agreement that from both sides, Mercedes or Hamilton could terminate it after 1 year if they wanted to. We weren't sure that was a possibility initially when it was announced as a 2-year extension, but that was the case. Hamilton decided to execute that break clause and is now going to Ferrari. So obviously, break clauses, exit clauses do exist, but not usually in this way. Occasionally, though, the break clauses can be related to more specific details. This can include giving drivers a way out if there are any changes of senior personnel. Motorsport.com is aware of other driver contracts that have included such specifics. In the Verstappen case that has emerged in recent weeks, the Dutchman does indeed have such a clause that would allow him to walk away if Marko is dropped from the team. That would explain, of course, his comments, but this is the crazy part to me. According to sources, this clause was not part of the original contract that Verstappen and Red Bull signed back in 2022. Instead, it is understood that a clause forms part of an addendum to the contract that was added more recently. Even more intriguingly, it has been revealed by insiders that this addition to the original contract was put in place unilaterally by the Verstappens and Marko without Red Bull's F1 team nor Horner knowing anything about it at the time. Marko was able to do this because he is one of the two directors of Red Bull Racing, so is able to act on the team's behalf. This is just so remarkable to me, and I wonder when this happens. So clearly, at least it seems this way, when they signed the deal in 2022, it was potentially all sunshine and rainbows. Dietrich Mateschitz at that point was still very much alive, because I think that deal was signed early March 2022, and Mateschitz passed away, I think, October 2022. So at the time, it was all looking good internally at Red Bull. Seemingly, since Mateschitz's death, the feeling then was, okay, Mateschitz has passed away, Dietrich Mateschitz passed away, all of a sudden, the doors are open to potentially try and grab some more power internally. Marko then comes in behind Horner's back. Now, Horner has also been doing things behind Marko's back, because there's a rumour, speculation, but worth mentioning, that Horner has gone to Nvidia and basically the 51% Red Bull owners in Thailand and said, hey, I will buy Red Bull Technologies and I will run it as a separate entity myself with the help of my financiers, effectively trying to pull off a coup where he takes over control of Red Bull entirely himself, at least as an F1 team. That was apparently done without the knowledge of the Austrians or of Marko, and apparently the same type of behaviour has been happening the other way around, with Marko going behind Horner's back, and even apparently the rest of Red Bull didn't know this, which is so crazy, right? And you got to wonder if this is even possible. But Marko, he's Dr. Marko for a reason. I think he got a doctorate in 1967 or something like that anyway, like ages ago. He is like a doctor of law, Mr. Helmut Marko. So he knows a thing or two about this type of stuff, and maybe that's why he was able to pull this off. That's what the rumour is. Because he is a director of Red Bull Racing, he was able to make this addendum to the contract without anybody knowing. it seems difficult to believe that Red Bull wouldn't be aware of this, but I don't know, Marko's a sneaky guy, and apparently that's what they've been able to pull off here. So without Horner knowing this was even happening, Verstappen and Marko have put themselves in an exit clause, which gives them power over the team to some degree. At least they can say to Horner, look, make things how we want it, or we're going to leave. And Horner will say, I don't care, you can leave. Like, I'm going to manage the team myself, and I'm going to take some ownership, because my mate Yovidia is apparently wanting to make that happen. But that's, again, all speculation. Red Bull hasn't commented on this, and it gives Verstappen a clear way out, which makes sense in terms of his statements in the recent weeks. At the end of the day, it's about relationships within the team and communication. If things that are very important to you disappear in the team, then it would be an unworkable situation if that were to happen. I've always been open about that. They know all about it, saying, get rid of Marko, I'm going to go as well, and we have finessed this contract clause in place to allow that to happen. So pretty incredible sabotage, if you want to call it that, or whatever you want to say, behind the scenes. And I wonder when Horner and the team found out about this, because we heard about this rumour of this clause in the media a couple of weeks ago now. I don't know how long much before that the team was aware that this addendum had been added, but this is one of the reasons why the other teams that might be interested in Verstappen services are very much thinking it's a possibility now. They mentioned Mercedes in the article, they mentioned Aston Martin in the article as the two most likely candidates should that circumstance arise. I also thought this was worth mentioning because it wasn't long ago, this is what, September 2023, that, if you guys remember, Helmut Marko made certain comments about Sergio Perez, and there was lots of friction understandably at the time. Horner says that Red Bull Racing didn't address it because Marko is not an employee of Red Bull Racing. He is part of the Red Bull wider group. So that's why we did not say anything about it at the time. So whatever Horner wants to say about Marko, he's not really involved in Red Bull Racing. He's part of the Red Bull group. Apparently, he is one of the directors of Red Bull Racing, which enables him to make such a move behind Horner's back. So remarkable trickery and skullduggery going on behind the scenes. I don't know if I'll ever use the word skullduggery again here on the channel, but it felt somewhat appropriate for this particular moment, so we're going to go with it. And maybe if more skullduggery unfolds over the coming weeks, then I'll say it again, but we'll leave it there for today, a special day in channel history. And yeah, Eric Van Haren said this back on the 4th of March, and now we're hearing more information as to exactly how that came true. So very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Just one final thing to mention I thought was interesting for you guys. This was going around today on the last time a team that wasn't Red Bull, Ferrari or Mercedes, the big three, won a Grand Prix. There was actually a 7-year gap here, pretty remarkable to be honest, between 2013, the Australian Grand Prix that's coming up with Kimi Räikkönen, 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, all the way up to 2020 before any team that wasn't those three won a race. Didn't necessarily mean those seasons were dull. There were some entertaining seasons in there, right, where Ferrari and Mercedes had a bit of a battle. Obviously, 2016, 2014, yes, Mercedes dominance, but at least going down to the final race in terms of who the champion was going to be. And then 2020, 2021, we had 4 different teams winning within the course of 2 years. AlphaTauri at Monza, of course, with Pierre Gasly. Racing Point at Sakir, of course, with Sergio Perez. Alpine with Ocon at Hungary 2021. And then after the Verstappen-Hamilton crash at Turn 1 Monza, McLaren got that 1-2. Still remarkably to me, the only 1-2 of the 2021 season was the McLaren 1-2, of course, at Monza. But look, we had a 7-year break between 2013 and 2020 when only 3 teams won Grand Prix. We've now seen that start again over the last couple of years. Yes, Mercedes have only won 1 at Brazil 2022, but apart from that, it's just been Red Bull and Ferrari over the last couple of seasons. So are we going to have another 7-year gap or whatever until we get another team actually winning a Grand Prix? I'm not so sure, but well, history tells us one thing. The regulations, the cost cap, the wind tunnel testing time, on paper says something else, but we haven't really seen too much evidence of that so far in this cost cap era. But very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new. Thanks for 45,000 subs as well. Pretty sure we smashed that yesterday, so massively appreciate it, and lots more stories on this I'm sure to come. So take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.